Okay, and Mindy's there in case the pizza's ready. So we could begin if you'd like. I will tell
Okay,
you.
great. I'm just going to do a quick introduction just for posterity's sake. Welcome everybody to Unraveled. Our book of the year is Unraveled, the Life and Death. Oh, it's backwards. Is it backwards for you guys? The Life and Death of a Garment. And today's movie viewing is on the same topic, Riverblue, about the fast fashion industry. And it all falls into our Tikkun Olam campaign this year of the Buy Nothing campaign that we're introducing to the congregation and our neighbors and friends. Basically, the idea that we need to be more conscious and conscientious consumers if we don't want to run out of the resources that our planet has provided for us. Of course, all that because from a Jewish point of view, it's taking care of and leaving the world that God made us in a better place than we found it, and in a better quality than it was given to us. So I don't think we're really doing a great job of that, unfortunately. Hopefully we'll get better at it, but of course education and knowledge is the way to change our behaviors. And both the movie, and I haven't seen the movie yet, but the book, one of the main points in this great book by Maxine Beda is that we need to take back our power, both as consumers and citizens, if we're going to change how the global industry of fashion is treating both our world, our environment, and the people in it. Mainly, unfortunately, low-income women are the ones that get hit the most by this industry. So I'm really excited to introduce Barry Truchil, a wonderful and very valued member of our congregation and our Tikkun Olam committee, and a wonderful professor at the University of Rider. And he's going to introduce the topic and the movie, and we're going to watch, and then we're going to have a great discussion session afterwards. So looking forward to that. And I'm going to let Barry take it from here. Thanks so much, guys.
Nobody is within like 15, 20 feet of me. So if it's okay, I'm going to take my mask off. Hi, everybody. Before I even give my thank yous to everybody, I want to let everybody know that I did Wordle in just 2 tries today, and I can prove it on my phone. Okay, it's all guessing, but I did do it, and I put it on Facebook for anybody to prove it. That's what mutes it. But anyway, I'm just here showing the video, but I want to thank the whole Tikkun Olam committee, especially Dara and Susan. They're so well organized. They have such great vision for the group. And even today, everything was handled so well. And pretty much I just had to show up. So I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Howard, too, for setting up the technology and the Zoom. It says something about the Emet congregation, because you don't find too many people who are older than 12 years old who can handle all of the technology. And we see that Howard can do that. So that's great. Basically, to introduce the video, we just have to think about in a world today where we purchase commodities in the marketplace, and we buy something and we see it as a product to consume, but we're very unaware of anything that transpired up until the time that we purchase it. So there's a history to every product that we buy, and we kind of become disassociated with that. And when we learn about it, then we sometimes make changes. We make changes by looking for social policies to regulate things, or We change our consumption patterns to do that. For food, for example, now that we know that there's grass-fed milk, we might choose that as a way to do it. We might regulate hormones and growth enhancements that are given to cattle, so we can look at policy that way. Sometimes now when people find out how veal is made, we taste veal and it's great, but then when we learn that calves don't really get to see the sun until the day they're slaughtered, then we might stop eating veal for that reason. So in a sense, we make these changes once we learn about the product that we're consuming. Even growing up, my mom used to make tongue all the time. Well, not all the time, but she would make tongue. And I always thought that was a Yiddish term for a type of food. And so one day I was fool enough to ask my mom, what is tongue? And then she told me what tongue was, and I haven't eaten tongue since. So once you know what it's about. So once we learn about the commodity that we're purchasing, we sometimes make choices about making life better for life, the animals, and the people who are working on delivering what we have. We haven't yet, and we've done it well with food, we haven't done it as well with clothing. You know, we see clothing at a fancy store, everything looks nice, we're happy with it, especially cheap fashion. We wonder how is some clothes being made cheaply these days and not going up with inflation like other products. So this video and the book Unraveling kind of sheds insights into that part of the making of the product that we consume that we never see. And by seeing that, we'll learn and then make choices just like we do with food. So on that note, we just could start making the video unless, Rabbi, would you like to say anything? Oh, do you want to make any remarks? Oh, okay, then we're ready to go. And all I have to do is find out where the button to push is, and we're good. So let's watch the video, and then we're gonna have great conversation afterwards, okay? So see you all in a little bit.
Shout if you guys can't see this, but we tested out before everything happened, and it looked like it was doing okay. So.
And it's called Riverblue. Get it, blue jeans?
So impressed, but one, it made me realize in the overall scheme of things that our planet is quite small and quite finite. The other thing that was very noticeable.
Sorry, get that from the beginning.
My dad in the late 60s brought home a photograph of Earth as seen from outer space. And I was so impressed by it. But one, it made me realize in the overall scheme of things that our planet is quite small and quite finite. The other thing that was very noticeable is, I mean, clearly it's a blue planet. But of all the water on this Earth, 97% is saline, it's in the oceans, 2% is locked up in ice. That only leaves us 1% that's found in lakes and rivers. And a lot of that water is not accessible. So really, when you talk about, when you really come down to it, we have a very small amount of water, and that's got to accommodate not only the needs that humans have for drinking water, but it's got to accommodate all of those other needs, agricultural needs, industrial needs. So I think we have to treat water in a much more respectful way. I think we have to treat rivers in a much more respectful way than we have in past.
The wars of the future will not be fought about oil. The wars of the future is going to be fought about water.
China, with more than 1.3 billion people, this is the most populous country on Earth. The stress to supply clean water is almost insurmountable, as their rivers are flowing disaster zones. World Watch Institute wrote that 70% of China's lakes and rivers are contaminated, which leaves little fresh water for the people who rely on them. In recent years, China has gone through a major transformation. Once an impoverished, farming-reliant country, it has now morphed into the factory of the world. No other country exports more goods than China does, but that came at a high price. The widespread dumping of toxic chemicals has poisoned rivers and groundwater.
I think it's one of the most critical environmental issues in China. Water pollution is damaging the freshwater biodiversity, but more than that, it's also creating such a big public health risk. Potentially, now we have hundreds of millions of people exposed to water pollution.
Ma Zhen is one of China's most prominent environmental activists. He was named one of the 100 most influential persons in the world by Time magazine. Ma's book, titled China's Water Crisis, was that country's first book focusing on China's pollution problem.
So many people live along the rivers, and in those countryside, when the rivers got contaminated, they dig a well, and then the shallow aquifer easily got contaminated. And then we started seeing people getting sick, and then the extraordinary high rate of cancer and other diseases cropped up. Cancer villages cropped up along those rivers.
There are places that have been identified and acknowledged as, having unusually high cancers associated with poor water quality. They do have problems with drinking water supply of blue-green algal toxins, so there's a high incidence of liver cancers that are associated with that.
It's always a disturbing experience looking at these pictures, so sometimes I choose not to look at them too often, but you have to go there and you have to document them. Otherwise, these people's voice doesn't get heard. And they need people to be aware that the cost of development that China is suffering from.
The approach that's been taken in China up until now has been, firstly focused on development and the economy, and that's been done with a full acknowledgement of what that will do to the environment. So I think a full understanding that the environment will pay the price of that. And now they've reached the point in that development where acknowledging the social and environmental and the health problems associated with it, now's the time to act.
Recently, we have big cities where their whole drinking water source are being threatened by pollution. We have, in past years, several cases where, cities with several million population have to shut down their whole water supply because they fear that their drinking water source is being contaminated.
They've gone through a very, very rapid stage of industrialisation. So, in the last 40, 50 years, we've seen massive industrialisation, a lot of hydropower development, and a lot of industries developing without adequate pollution control. Cities that are growing at an incredible rate. So, the number of cities of millions of people has really expanded. And so the waterways have taken the brunt of that development. And as you can imagine, that many of them are in an appalling state.
In response to widespread environmental and health problems, activists in China focused their investigations on water pollution and discovered one of the major sources led them to the Western markets, with the fashion industry as one of the key suspects in the destruction of China's lakes and rivers. These activists have produced campaigns to create consumer awareness on the issue.
These are toxic substances released into our precious lakes and rivers by textile manufacturers, just for printing and dyeing our clothes. Fashion is too beautiful to have anything to do with this mess. We're here to challenge it.
Dhaka, the largest city in Bangladesh and one of its dirtiest. The toll of becoming the world's second leading clothing exporter after China can be seen and smelled from the riverbanks surrounding Dhaka. This river, the Buriganga, the lifeline for the city, is one of the most polluted rivers in the world, and the manufacturers of cheap clothing can claim some of this responsibility. The outflow from Bangladesh's garment and tannery industries has contributed heavily to what experts describe as a water pollution catastrophe.
Looking at the city, what I've seen so far, it's a sprawling city, a huge city of 15 million people, sixth biggest in the world. Also, I can see that pollution is an issue here. It was recently ranked as the second worst city to live in from a quality of life and environmental point of view. And certainly things like textiles and tanneries are part of that. I do plan on getting in the river in the days ahead. I do plan on visiting the tanneries, and certainly it's my goal to learn a lot more about these issues.
Mark Angelo, a celebrated international river conservationist and member of the Explorers Club, is on a global expedition, taking him to some of the most polluted rivers around the world. His goal is to document the state of the waterways of our planet, and his research leads him to Bangladesh, where he is about to discover the dark side of the fashion industry.
I had read a lot about the Buriganga River. I knew that it was one of the most polluted rivers on Earth. This is an area, and particularly this river, is a place that's heavily impacted by the textile and tannery sectors. So I thought it was important to come and see it and get a feel as to how it got to this state and what could possibly be done to turn things around. And as I stand here, when I catch the wind in the face, the smell is unbelievably bad. It's atrocious. It's hard to imagine a stream more polluted than this one. About a third of the pollution that comes into here is sewage. Most of the sewage in the city is untreated, but about 2/3 of the pollution here is all from the tanneries upriver. It's all industrial pollution, chemicals, heavy metals. So this waterway is so polluted it cannot sustain any life. And the pollution gets so bad during the dry season that there are parts of this canal that you can literally light on fire.
In Bangladesh, there are very few voices who speak out against the government and factory owners who are ignoring costly environmental regulations. But there are some who take pollution very seriously. One such man is Pinaki Roy. As the deputy chief reporter for Dhaka's Daily Star, Pinaki's beat is the environment, but his passion is for the river.
I have passion for them. I was born here, I'm grown up here. I love rivers, and people who live by the river, they really feel sad about the situation, about the condition of the river now. So they say, can't you do something so that the river is clean again?
Pinaki investigates in areas where textile companies group together behind high brick walls. It's here where he gathers evidence of rampant pollution. While companies make it difficult to see what's going on in their guarded compounds, telltale channels all lead to outflows that release toxic liquids straight into the rivers surrounding the city.
There are hundreds of thousands of garments industries in Dhaka city. Those industries basically, discharging their pollution, everywhere. So now every part of the city you go to the river and you will find it polluted. This is all the untreated effluent, coming from those garments and dyeing industries and directly going into the river. This water is so toxic, there is no aquatic life, there is no fish in this water. And local community, they cannot use this water anymore. They have set up industries for years, but they have never set up ETP, effluent treatment plant. So it is not that they don't have money. It is all about intention. They don't have intention about clean environment. So that's why they don't do it. They should respect the river, but they don't. They are doing this just to increase their profit.
One of my very first days, I walked down and I found a boatman, and I asked him if he would take me out in the river, and he was happy to. But getting out on the river was a real eye-opener, and it was depressing. The color of the water was ink black. The water also had a thickness to it, and as our oar cut through the water literally rolled, almost like heavy oil. The river was more chemical than water. On my journey over the last couple of years, I've seen so many rivers that are so polluted. Probably the Buriganga, though, is the most polluted of the rivers I've seen. Some of the things that I observed while floating the river, just looking at the water, feeling the texture of it, the smell of it, knowing it was totally off, totally unnatural, that saddens me deeply.
Much of Dhaka's pollution problem emanates from this area of the city, Hazarabad, home to more than 200 tanneries. This is ground zero for a lot of toxic waste. Raw material enters through the doors of the tanneries to be transformed into wide swaths of leather that will be shipped out of the country and used in the manufacturing of shoes, purses, and other leather goods. What ends up on the fashion runways and in many of our own closets has its noxious beginnings in this filthy section of the city.
I probably won't have to go to hell to find out how it looks. If one goes to Hazaribagh Tannery, that would tell you probably how hell looks like.
Saeeda Rizwana Hassan is Bangladesh's chief environmental lawyer.
The Dhaka has been ranked as the second most uninhabitable cities of the world. And this extremely hazardous export-oriented industry is actually contributing to that process of making Dhaka uninhabitable. I would say even 15 years back, the river water was usable. You could still boat on the river without having that bad smell. We saw a living river, what is now being described as a biologically dead river. And what is more frustrating for us to see is, despite all the movements to save the river, despite the court coming forward to protect the river, the condition of the river is deteriorating with each passing day.
If you visit those rivers in any day, you'll find that different color, blue, red, black, all directly going to the river.
Pinaki Roy is following a lead on a story he's working on, taking him inside one of the tanneries in the Hazarabad area. Normally, cameras are not allowed in, but by focusing on Pinaki the reporter, we're able to capture a seldom-seen view of what goes on behind the walls of a typical tannery operation.
Tannery workers or textile dye workers who have been dealing with those chemicals directly, they're touching those chemicals in bare hand without any gloves. A lot of underage children, like below 18, they work here, and many of them do not have even boots, gloves. They complain a lot, but they think this is their fate. Now see, now they have a tea break, like working break. So after the break, they are having their little snacks in bare hand without proper cleaning. So in this way, maybe they consume a lot of chemicals. I have been doing this for a few years now, and time to time I keep on visiting, and I feel it's awful.
This is the heart of the tanning district, widely viewed as being one of the most polluted places on Earth. And there are chemicals everywhere. I smell chemicals, it totally pervades the air. I feel like I'm breathing them in. My throat burns, I feel it in my eyes. So this is not a healthy place to be. And yet there are 180,000 people that live around here. Almost 20,000 work here in the tanneries and get exposed to this every day.
if you go to the Hazaribagh tannery, if you see how people are living there are small children who are passing through the tannery area every day to go to the school, and they have lost their sensory adaptation. They can't smell anymore. It's totally gone.
The physicians said people often come to them with gastric, with ulcer, with chest pain, and obviously with skin diseases and some diseases like cancer. So they're suffering a lot.
Local people won't complain because they know that even if they complain, there is hardly any relief. But I think the consumers have a big role to play there, because your consumption pattern doesn't have to be responsible only. You have to make sure that it's not exploitative.
Big box retailers from the West look to Bangladesh for low-cost, high-output leather products and clothing. The cost and human suffering producing cheap clothing has been well documented. But for global brands that buy clothing from Bangladeshi factories, pollution rarely gets the same attention as workplace conditions. And local environmentalists say global buyers have done far too little.
Accident happened in the garment sector, like Rana Plaza accident, where more than 1,000 people died. After that, I found in Twitter, in social media, a lot of criticism against those, retailers who are buying from Bangladesh, who are buying from those garments. So there are a lot of criticism. And I would say, the buyer from the West, you want cheaper clothes, you cannot, pollute our environment. Buying these cheap clothes, they are also responsible because they are pushing these industrialists for more and more cheaper clothes. And this is a question of ethics. They are not caring about environment. They somehow just want to, make their production cost cheap and cheaper.
I'm here in Bangladesh, a country that's widely known for producing low-cost jeans, shirts, T-shirts. People around the world buy them. But the reality is that low-cost clothing has a very high cost attached to it. Look at what we've seen from both an environmental and public health perspective. It's a calamity, and this kind of disaster is something that I've seen on river after river after river. So once again, I think a key point is that there's often a very high cost attached to low-cost clothing.
Just because you want to get something at a lower price doesn't mean you would allow a precious resource like river to be destroyed. Doesn't mean you would allow people to die in some other part of the world because they don't have a regular health monitoring system. And you would never know that by buying something at a lower price, you're actually contributing to the death, illness, suffering of people in some other part of this world. If people of Bangladesh do not have water tomorrow, they'll have to find another place to go where they'll have water, which means that we'll have to migrate out, which means that the rest of the world will also be disturbed if we are disturbed in this very small country. And everyone has a responsibility to protect the Mother Earth. If I'm an environmentalist, I can't say I care only about the rivers of Bangladesh. I have to care about the rivers of the world.
These are conditions that the workers there have to live with every day. So you can't help but wonder the toll that's taking on their health. And I don't think it was a coincidence that we did not see very many older people working in the tanneries. I think if you have to work with those chemicals every day, in those conditions every day, I think that's the recipe for a much shorter life.
India, a nation of extreme contrasts, with some of the most sacred and dirtiest rivers in the world. It's difficult to imagine today, but for some farmers who live on the banks of the Ganges, there was a time in living memory when the water in the river was clean enough to drink. Today, the rivers they revere as goddesses are in severe decline. Some of India's greatest rivers begin as pristine water sources, but not far downriver, they become open flowing sewers. Perched on the edge of an environmental catastrophe, one of the key issues is what to do with the excrement of about 600 million people who are defecating in the open. Studies have found that untreated sewage is the single most important source of water pollution in India. While more than 500 million people rely on one of its most holy rivers, the Ganges, they also contribute to its abuse in the most elemental way.
Varanasi is an amazing city. It's known as the Eternal City. It embodies the essence of Hinduism, and because of its close proximity to the Ganges, it's a very well-known pilgrimage site. More than a million pilgrims come here every year. Some come to take a holy dip at this location to cleanse their soul, cleanse them of their sins. Others come to spend their final days here. They'll die here and have their ashes scattered in the river, in the belief that that will aid in their path towards heaven. It will liberate the soul and free them from that never-ending cycle of reincarnation. This city has an incredible spiritual energy, and nowhere else on earth does life, death, and religion blend so seamlessly. I've always loved India. I've been here many, many times, but I've always been disappointed in the state of the Ganges River. It's a river that I've come to know really well. I've been to the headwaters, I've been to the mouth, I've paddled or traveled along much of the rest of it. It's not the biggest river in the world, it's not the longest, but it may be the most venerated, particularly by the 500 million people that live within its basin.
I think it's when faith, which is very powerful, becomes your weakness. I mean, there is no doubt that the Ganga has tremendous self-cleaning capacities. It's been recorded, it's been understood. It's why there is such a sense of the fact that this is a river which can regenerate itself. But I think today it is also something that we have to accept, that that river is polluted. We have defiled it beyond its cleansing abilities, and that we have to clean it up. And it's crying that it needs cleaning up.
Religion and science are uncomfortable bedmates in India. To live by the Ganges and see obvious pollution doesn't sway those who believe in the river's ability to cleanse itself. Religious men, who hold great influence with India's population, believe in the river's purity and sing its praises, while environmentalists hope their influence would be used to convince more people to clean up the river.
I think it's the people who hold the faith that must talk to people and make them understand that, yes, the river has intrinsic self-cleansing abilities, and we have faith that the river is the most important being. But yet, we as a modern society have even breached its own abilities to clean itself. And we have to do something about it. And you have to be able to bring science into religion. The fact is, if you have dissolved oxygen levels of 0, the river is dead. Call it what you want. You just haven't officially cremated it, but it's dead.
Allahabad. Nowhere in the world is faith exhibited more than in this city. Here at the confluence of the Yamuna and Ganges rivers, 110 million people gather to celebrate the Kumbh Mela.
We are a country which holds rivers sacred, and yet we are committing hydrocide. We're deliberately murdering our rivers. The strength of our religion is that we worship nature. And if you worship nature, then the last thing that you can do is to defile it or degrade it.
We are going for Kumbh Mela. It's happening today and it's massive. Like last Kumbh Mela in 2001 saw a crowd of almost 70 million people turn up during the festival. Each of the bathing days which have passed, the crowd has been 50% to 25% more than what they had estimated. So most probably we're gonna have 20 million, 25 million today.
Congregation of this size and scale that anywhere in the world, okay? I think it's important to understand that they come because they worship the river, they celebrate the river.
Growing up, Kumbh was something spectacular, something which my city is known for. It's the biggest gathering of human beings on earth. As I have aged down and I've realized that excitement was actually a kind of fear which I harbor, because the things I had to live with before the Kumbh started and then after the Kumbh finished is something which is nothing to be proud of. The whole buzz around Kumbh is around a small area which is called the Sangam, where the Ganges and the Yamuna meet. So it's that area where all the activities are surrounded.
It's time in India that we did some very serious stock taking about what's going wrong and why are we, a generation of Indians, becoming a generation which is losing, to my mind, its most sacred asset. A river.
The Kumbh Mela is this spectacle, this great celebration of the Ganges River, and the fact that all the human waste from the 100 million visitors there at present is allowed to seep into the soil or flow directly into the river, I think that's wrong. I love this country, I love the culture, I love the customs, the colors, even the chaos. But I've always been saddened about the state of the Ganges River, particularly knowing that it is revered so much and it is worshipped as a goddess. And it seems like a bit of a disconnect that it can be worshipped on one hand and we can allow her to get so polluted on the other.
For them, the river is still a goddess and still holy, no matter what's flowing in the river. You'll tell them the river is getting polluted, they'll say, yes, the river is getting polluted, it's very dirty, the water is so bad. But risking your own salvation by avoiding to do the ritual is something they cannot fathom with.
Kumbh is a tough one, but I mean, I take back from it. I mean, I'm a Hindu, but not the one who would go to the river for rituals, more for the beauty of it. But, you know, I take back with it enormous awe. And the river means so much to so many people in my country. And I think that is what is beautiful.
On a day like this, When 3 times the population of New York City gathers on the river's banks, the government has ordered cities upstream to stop polluting the Ganges so that the faithful will have a clean river to bathe in. Kanpur, a city of 4 million, is among the world's top 10 cities with the worst air pollution and is the second most polluted city in India. It's the leather capital of the region, and the tanneries have been ordered to shut down during the Kumbh Mela. And for the most part, they have.
Today, being one of the main bathing days, this drain seems to be closed. But after main bathing days, it will be as usual. You can see the black viscous chemicalized water going to the river.
The Tannery District, established along the Ganges River during the British colonial rule, is Kanpur's economic mainstay and a major source of pollution.
Kanpur hosts 400-odd leather factories and tanneries. And these tanneries use dyes, acids, basic chrome sulfate, other heavy metal containing chemicals. And the wastewater they generate is a cocktail of these chemicals, which are lethal to human health and other life also.
Zafar Lawry owns a mid-sized tannery in Kanpur. And while he understands that the Tannery District may be suffering from a poor reputation among environmental groups, he also believes that it's a perception not deserved. And he denies that any of his tannery wastewater runs into the Ganges.
No, I think they have some misconceptions, misunderstanding, because if you are standing here in my tannery, it was about more than 3 kilometers far from here. It is impossible to send a drop of water directly to the Ganges.
This is a mixture of tannery wastewater. It contains a variety of chemicals, the same chemicals which are used by leather factories and tanneries.
I believe the water comes from the tannery area. It's not with the effluent from the industry. It could be, I hope it could be domestic waste. It is quite impossible. The water should directly goes anything from the Ganges. It is impossible. First, we have a drain system, then we have a channel system. Then we have the municipal water discharge system. So it is quite impossible. Exactly, it's impossible. You can say that.
At the edge of the Tannery District sits a holding area containing streams and ponds filled with noxious liquids. From this area, large pipes shoot out and run for many miles, heading towards the Ganges River.
This water is being put into this irrigation canal. It irrigates around 2,500 hectares of land. And you can see that this water is not properly treated and is not safe for irrigation. In every family, you will find someone afflicted with some kind of a skin problem, ranging from rashes, boils, numbness in the limbs. It also contains known carcinogen chromium, so maybe people have cancers. Chromium has been reported in cattle milk and also agricultural produce. So this heavy metal has entered the food chain and is finally reaching us and affecting the health of the people.
This stretch of the river is extremely contaminated, but life in the villages sitting on its banks goes on as usual. While filming there, we observed a man poling his boat to shore. His small craft was filled with a couple hundred fish. He told us he had found his catch just floating on top of the river. Newspapers reported that the dead fish were the result of a chemical spill into the river earlier that day. The man was cleaning the fish to feed his family and took the rest of his catch to sell at the local market that afternoon.
When a river's been so polluted or so abused for many, many years, you can't turn it around overnight. I look at a country like India. I look at this river we're on now. It's going to be a huge challenge to turn this around. There are huge issues pertaining to sewage and industrial pollution. And on a river like the Ganges, I think the young generation that's coming along, I believe in the years ahead, they will have the same reverence for this river that their parents had. But as part of that, I also think they'll see an obligation to have a cleaner Ganges.
Zambezi, a true life-giving river, worthy of its reputation of being one of the great rivers of the world. Mark Angelo has made the trip here before, a far different river than the Ganges, and a place he finds rejuvenates his soul. A nice reminder of what he works towards for all rivers.
The thing I love about the Zambezi is the diversity, and the wildlife here is incredibly prolific. Animals gather in huge numbers beside the river and often right in the river. And to see all of that from a canoe, up close, virtually at water level, is an unforgettable experience. So in many ways, I look, particularly at this part of the Zambezi, as an example of what a river can and should be.
Mark Angelo is an internationally celebrated river conservationist and the founder of World Rivers Day, an event held to clean rivers in more than 60 countries around the world. The United Nations has recognized his work protecting what Mark calls the vital arteries of this planet. Mark often mentions that rivers run through his soul in a journey that began as a young boy growing up in Los Angeles.
I grew up with an interesting background. My parents were very much involved in old Hollywood, the movie industry. And it was Hollywood was a fascinating place to grow up in the 50s. But my interest took me elsewhere. I happened to live by the Los Angeles River, a river that had been destroyed in many ways, totally encased in a big concrete culvert. And I used to hang out there a lot, but I didn't have to be very old before I realized that's not the way a river was meant to be. On the other side of the coin, though, we lived right next door to a place called Griffith Park. It was a 4,000-acre urban oasis, a wild oasis in the middle of the city. And I could go out my door, cross the street, and be up in the hills and just hike for hours. And I got to know a lot of the small creeks and streams there. So by the time I was 15 or 16, I was really into the outdoors. Then I went at the age of 17 to the University of Montana, and I got into fly fishing and paddling in a very big way. And that cemented things for me. And at that stage, I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life working in a field related to river conservation. As I got older, I started to look at rivers in a much broader way for the many values they possess. And now I look at them as literally lifelines in the broadest sense. And at this stage of my life, whenever I'm on a river, it does much to rejuvenate my spirit, my soul, and the world seems a saner place.
Jakarta, a city of 28 million, the capital of Indonesia. Cosmopolitan with wide avenues and top-of-the-line shopping, Jakarta is also at the headwaters of one of the most polluted rivers in the world, the Citarum. This river of garbage is a shameful example of mankind's inhumanity to the environment, and the crime largely goes unpunished by law. The Chitaram was once a gentle flowing river where fishermen cast their nets, pulling in a bounty of healthy fish that fed their families. Today, it's a river in crisis, choked by the domestic waste of 9 million people, and thick with the cast-offs from hundreds of factories along its banks. It's hard to imagine that 80% of the population of Jakarta relies on this river for their drinking water. This river bubbles like a witch's cauldron because of the pollution that is sunk to the bottom and is off-gassing. More than 500 factories, most of them producing textiles which require chemical treatment, line the banks of this 200-mile river, spewing waste into the water.
Everybody has the right to know what is being discharged by a factory, how many is being discharged per day, per year, per month. This information is important so we know what is in our water and we can control it.
In Indonesia, researchers allege the textile industry is a major contributor to the poor health of the Citarum River.
In Citarum, it is well known that there are a lot of what we call anonymous pipe. So this kind of pipe appears in the middle of nowhere like this. So the pipe is underground. You cannot really see this factory that is dumping this. And also it is shared pipe, making it even more difficult to know who's the perpetrators.
While the source of this particular pipe is cloaked in mystery, these researchers have had success in uncovering what they call a criminal case of water pollution. These three were part of a larger group who spent 2 years following a trail of pollution on the Citarum River. Environmental activists collected samples of wastewater discharged from the PT Gistex factory in Bandung, an area known for its textile manufacturing.
Before we actually took sample, we did field research, making sure that this pipe really belongs to the company. We found that this company emits toxic material to the water.
In a report titled Toxic Threads Polluting Paradise, Greenpeace has published a story of big brands and water pollution in Indonesia. In their report, Greenpeace states that major international brands are conducting business with suppliers such as PT Gistex, who has been linked to toxic water pollution and murky business practices. One of these brands, they write, is Gap, which Greenpeace states has been linked to toxic water scandals before.
Here in Indonesia, we have a textile manufacturer that is supplying for Gap. And Gap is a global company, it's a global brand, and similar to other companies that have been linked to pollution in other places in Asia, we have made demands for them to clean up the supply chain.
We reached out to Gap head office in San Francisco for a comment on their connection to water pollution and the PT Gistex factory in Bandung. They wrote back stating,
"As for your question regarding PT Gistex, we were alerted to the Greenpeace report on PT Gistex in Indonesia and confirmed to Greenpeace that we do not source from their textile facility, but that we do work with the parent company, PT Gistex Group. We reiterated to the parent company the importance of adherence to Gap Inc.'s Code of Vendor Conduct, including provisions regarding environmental health and safety and chemical restrictions, as well as compliance with Indonesian law. Gap Inc. supports additional initiatives that are underway to help conserve fresh water and improve the environmental performance of dyeing and finishing facilities."
We can't do too much about history, but let's make sure moving forward that the leaders of the fashion industry, the leaders of all industries that engage in pollution are becoming much more aggressive in cleaning up the act and to ensure that they do not have to make money on the basis of environmental destruction.
China. This country has some of the most beautiful rivers in the world, but also some of the most toxic.
Major river systems are often in pretty good shape at the very top end, but as they move downriver, they degrade. They pick up an increasing number of pollutants and contaminants, and that's very much the case with the Li River here in Guilin. In its very upper reaches, it's one of the cleaner waterways in China, but as it moves along and eventually merges with the Pearl, it then becomes one of the most polluted. Access to safe, clean water, I think, is a fundamental human need and a basic human right. And yet here in China, 2/3 of its rural population, almost 500 million people, have to use water that's been contaminated by human or industrial waste. So gastrointestinal cancer is the #1 killer here in the countryside. The dark side of China's economic miracle has been both a health crisis and an environmental crisis due to a shortage of the one resource that no one can live without, and that's clean water.
There are rivers there where the chemical oxygen demand takes out all of the oxygen. So, you know, these are river systems that have no dissolved oxygen. There are levels of metal contamination and other industrial effluent that make it impossible for any living creatures. So there are certainly places where all of the sort of natural features are gone, and the water's virtually useless for all applications.
How did China's rivers get this bad? It's a question environmental campaigners in China have asked their government for many years.
We need to make them strengthen the enforcement. We need to have our court to open to public environmental lawsuits. But those are deep-rooted issues which cannot be overcome, easily. So we decided that the public must participate. We need to have an extensive public participation to help address this issue.
Environmental activists have spent years investigating the root causes for China's river pollution. But being in a communist state, they've had to tread lightly.
When we do investigation, we tend to be more careful because our aim is to get the problem exposed. But if you alert these polluters or make them aware that you are investigating them, they might take some action to stop you.
Tianji Ma and teams of toxic campaigners throughout China have been at the forefront of a long investigation into the sources of chemical substances finding their way into China's rivers. They've discovered the textile industry is a major contributor to China's river contamination.
You can find a lot of carcinogens in it. A lot of the carcinogens are related to dye because the industry uses a lot of dyes. And also you find chemicals that may disrupt the hormone system. We found chemicals that are really nasty that can change the sex of a fish, for example. And these kind of chemicals are still heavily used in China, even if some of them have already been banned in Europe or in North America. We also find chemicals that are persistent, which means when they get released into the environment, they don't break down and they travel around the world. So one toxic chemical being released by a Chinese textile factory may travel a half of a globe and ended up in the Canadian Arctic, where you can find in the body of a polar bear. So these are the really nasty toxic chemicals that we're talking about.
The textile industry is one of the major sources of water pollution in China. Every year it discharges about 2.5 billion tons of wastewater, and much of that not properly treated. I don't think the consumers, when they enjoy all this product, they would know about this. So what we need to do is to try to go on the ground with our partners through this underground research to really bring out the fact of the pollution and all its impact.
Investigations proved that toxic chemicals were being dumped into China's rivers, especially by the textile companies. The next step was to connect the dots and identify the companies responsible for the pollution.
We start to ask us question, who is doing business? Where do these products go? Where do people buy these products? So we start this chain of custody study where we're trying to track where those products go. We got the links that some of those products are actually sold to the world's biggest brand names, like Nike, Adidas, Puma, or fashion brands like Zara, H&M. We start to have this picture that when China is providing the whole world with all those clothing, at the same time, we are suffering all the pollution that is left behind. So we found this really astonishing fact. So we start to present all our findings to the whole world. We want to make people aware that every single piece of clothing that you buy comes with a cost.
Greenpeace took an aggressive stance against fashion, staging worldwide protests and releasing reports documenting the pollution problem. They set up a campaign challenging some of the biggest brands in fashion to detox their products, while hoping that consumers would get the message that some fashion comes with a large environmental price tag.
The reason Greenpeace started a detox campaign was we found that our rivers across the world were being deeply impacted by the dumping of poisonous toxic material in our rivers. Done with absolutely no regulation, no oversight, and sadly, many of the products that were being produced through this dirty, polluting way of producing fashion was actually the direct contributor to massive amounts of river contamination.
There is a joke in China. They say that you can predict the it color for the season by looking at the color of the river. You know, sort of, if they've dyed more yellow, then that's what the river will look like. There is really no way out of it, and it is depressing talking about it. It does make you feel very powerless to a certain extent. It's particularly scandalous how long it's been allowed to go on and how little has been done to highlight this problem for future generations, who are ultimately the ones that will have to foot the bill and really suffer the consequences. A lot of companies do things that are very, very hidden and very secret. I used to think, I wonder why. I know why now, because the damage is so huge. The damage that they have done is so huge. But we will be demanding to know who makes our clothes, where do they come from, what are they made out of, increasingly. And the industry will have to accommodate those demands.
Taken as a whole, the textile industry is a huge, complex global entity. But if we focus on one iconic consumer product, it offers a snapshot of how we all contribute to the issue of industrial water pollution. Investigators, as well as some who work in the fashion industry, have long known the dirty little secret behind the manufacturing of blue jeans. This iconic product illustrates some of the most visible and gross pollution caused by overseas production. But it wasn't always this way. From the 1960s to the 1990s, El Paso, Texas held the title Blue Jeans Capital of the World, producing almost 2 million pairs of jeans per week. Now, it's just a shell of its former self. The once mighty Rio Grande, a great water resource, ran directly through El Paso before it began to dry up. But the real impetus to El Paso losing the blue jeans manufacturing base was the signing of a free trade agreement, allowing clothing brands to look further afield for lower cost labor and production.
And the great question of this day is how to ensure security for our people at a time when change is the only constant. I believe we have made a decision now that will permit us to create an economic order in the world that will promote more growth, more equality, better preservation of the environment, and a greater possibility of world peace. We are on the verge of a global economic expansion that is sparked by the fact that the United States at this critical moment decided that we would compete, not retreat. In a few moments, I will sign the North American Free Trade Act into law. NAFTA will tear down trade barriers between our three nations. It will create the world's largest trade zone and create 200,000 jobs in this country by 1995 alone.
Soon after NAFTA's signing, manufacturers left for Mexico and eventually offshore to China, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. Industry also exported immense environmental problems simply because the environmental regulations in those countries were not nearly as strong as what exists in the United States. So where did all those jobs and jeans go? They came here. Xinjiang, the new jeans capital of the world.
Textiles are a huge industry in China. Last year, the country exported more than $200 billion in apparel. And Xinjiang is the blue jean capital of the world. They produce about 300 million pairs of jeans a year, a third of the world's supply.
As early as 30 years ago, this city had a small manufacturing base making blue jeans. What started off as just a few mom-and-pop operations has blossomed into becoming a major exporter of blue jeans to the world market, with a huge environmental impact.
I think some consumers just don't realize what kind of environmental impact or environmental footprints one single piece of jean would carry. When producing one piece of jean, actually it uses up a lot of water for washing and other processes, and also it releases a lot of polluted water into the environment.
Making a pair of jeans can be a water-intensive process. Levi's, the iconic manufacturer of blue jeans, did a study of how much water went into making one pair of their 501 jeans. They discovered it took almost 920 gallons of water, 400 megajoules of energy, and expelled 32 kilograms of carbon dioxide. Levi said that this was the equivalent of running a garden hose for 106 minutes, driving 78 miles, and powering a computer for 556 hours.
We found that this industry is having one of the lowest, if not the lowest, rate of water recycling. They just want to use the water once, and then they just discharge that into the rivers. And they got so much concentrated in some parts of China. So with that concentration of pollution, the impact to that local region is very serious.
It's been estimated that in a single year, one large fashion brand uses the equivalent of water that's in 43,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. The textile industry is one of the largest consumers of water in the world, using 3.2% of all water available to the human race every year.
Textiles environmentally can be a dirty business, and the fabric dyes used for jeans contain hazardous materials, things like mercury, cadmium, and lead. And the local industry here has long been accused of releasing its wastewater directly into the Pearl River. So while China's reaped huge economic benefits from the textile industry, that same industry has been a major contributor to its water pollution problem.
We don't own the factories anymore. If you own your factory, you will have rules and regulation, but also an instinct to be extremely effective in your production, and that includes managing your water and managing your waste. If you don't own your factory, let alone know the majority of where your clothes are being made, you have absolutely no interest and a great facility to go to bed at night thinking that's not my problem.
Ursula De Castro, a leader in sustainable fashion, has created a clothing line made entirely from discarded materials. She's concerned that her industry is one of the world's biggest polluters, with a business model based on high-volume, low-cost clothing, what many critics call fast fashion.
The reason why we let fashion pollute so much and we let it go this far is profit. Rich, fat men on boards wanting to make more and more money.
I don't think that we can any longer sit by while people are suffering and the planet is suffering for us to have economic gain. If everybody on this planet lived the way North America does, we'd need like 8 planets.
You know, it's funny because these companies can pretend like they don't know what's going on, but they absolutely do know what's going on. They don't want to acknowledge it because it means that they're willing participants of destroying the environment.
You are completely responsible as a company for how you're making your product. Are they acting that way? Not necessarily. For the most part, not at all.
Denim, the way that we look at it now, the way that we have it now, will be seen as fashion's greatest stupidity. Distressed denim, insanity made visible. It has become a huge hazard to the environment. And so the idea that we can be destroying the planet for the sake of clothing, especially the type of clothing that we are wearing these days is criminal.
Maybe it's because the demand of the world has gone crazy for this look and they want stuff to be distressed and stripes on it, and no vintage jean ever looked like that. So there is a difference between the early processing, which is really just to get it looked a little bit old, a little bit worn here and here, fine, not even whiskers, they want whiskers and all that stuff, you know. That's, come on guys.
The chemicals used in order to create the looks, whether they're called the whiskers, you know, the tear, are beyond unbelievable and continuous. There are the ones that make it look distressed through paint or distressed through, you know, sandpaper, whatever. One of the funniest scenes I saw in one of these denim factories was this huge warehouse full of people just literally sandpapering day in, day out, sandpapering denim at 98% humidity while they work, because that's what you need to preserve the right chemicals, which is an incredibly unpleasant way of working.
They are dying in the jean, doing jeans, breathing all this acid. And that destroys your lamb. Okay, the people die. Do we want now just to have, because you have a distressed gene, you wear distressed gene and you kill somebody?
Francois Gerbeau is credited as the man who invented stonewashed jeans. Early on, he also began using chemicals to get the distressed look in denim products.
We make a mistake at the beginning. We were responsible. When we start, first, we don't realize what we did was wrong. Because we make a mistake. We make a mistake because if you talk to me, okay, if we were talking, I don't know, before 1989, I tried to find everything more corrosive. We make all this treatment, washing, all the process of washing, and we invent from 72 to 89. We continue invention from using permanganate, using everything, acid, etc., etc. But I realized the importance of our work, what we did, and what was the reaction. Because pollution of river, everything, we invent that.
The fathers of our industry, people like Francois Gerbeau, like Adriano Goldsmith, they invented stonewash, they invented bleaching, they invented potassium permanganate. And at that time, they were just trying to find a beautiful product and a great product. And they didn't realize that these inventions one day will damage the ecology, the planet, and the rivers.
We have to slow down. We have to slow down the chemical. If everybody, the consumer, know this beautiful white here is made by acid, and this acid is something destroying the planet, we are committing a suicide for the planet. We are surely we know we go for what we talk about new generation. What we talk about that is no future. If we continue like this, it's done. It's done.
The main thing that happened is that at the end of the 80s or starting of the 90s, we have a tremendous delocalization of the production. From the US to China, from Italy, Spain, South Europe, that were strong production place, to India, etc. So immediately all the big plants start to produce without water treatment plants, throwing all the dirty water to the rivers and destroying the planet. And at the same time, the consumption increased, tremendously. In America, people buy 4 jeans every year. In Europe, 1.5 jeans every year. So consumption has tremendously increased.
In the past 20 years, China has effectively doubled the amount of textiles it produces. At first glance, this represents good news for the consumers who benefit from cheaper clothing and quicker turnaround in styles. But as the prices plummeted in the fashion industry, it was China's waterways and the people who rely on them who were paying the price of an increasing amount of untreated wastewater being dumped into these rivers. The toxic effects of industrialization appear irreversible, but history has proven that a biologically dead river can be reversed.
40 years ago, this river was in real trouble. There were no signs of life, primarily because of the pollution in the river.
Globally, we can learn from the massive conservation efforts and strict legislation implemented in London against the dumping of toxins that allows rivers like the Thames to regenerate.
There are lots of signs of life here now. There's 125 species of fish back in the river, so that certainly is a cause for hope.
We could save the planet if the planet won.
Milan, one of the world's most important fashion capitals, along with London, New York, and Paris. But we haven't come here to shop retail. A new technology in order to change the way that denim is produced.
40 years ago, the situation was completely different. No rules for the water, so you didn't care about the water pollution, about the chemicals. So the middle of 70 to the middle of 80 was, I think, a real mess in Italy for everybody. We put money in the water treatment, we put money to pay attention in what we are doing. And only when you put money, you can understand that you are using chemical that you don't need.
Luigi Caccia, the second-generation owner of Ital Denim, manages one of the leading companies in Europe for the production of denim. His company was one of the first to embrace Greenpeace's detox campaign.
Our first point is to make business, but at the end, we can understand only going deeper to understand how many danger things we are making just to make a pair of denim.
Luigi says it's hard for his company to compete with offshore denim companies, many who don't put any money into pollution controls.
The worst are using the chemicals in excess, the price is lower, the quality is pretty good, so how can I compete with this? This is the big difference between us and the rest of the world, the way we make it.
In many ways, Ital Denim follows the pattern of many other companies in the production of denim. But there is one major step that Ital Denim implements in the treatment of their cotton that eliminates toxic chemicals and reduces water usage by up to 80%. The production of denim begins with the arrival of cotton to the processing facility, where the raw product is broken down into thin strands that wrap from machine to build up a strong yarn. Once the yarn is spun, the roll is ready for dyeing. This is where Ital Denim has taken a huge turn and changed the processing of denim. Ital Denim turned to the ocean for a solution to standard chemical processing. They learned that by using the exoskeleton of shellfish crushed into a fine powder called chitosan, they could enhance the dyeability of denim.
The chitosan is very simple. It's the shellfish of the crab or the shrimp that is thrown away from the food industry, is recovered, transformed into chitosan, and it goes into the circular economy because we reutilize something that someone else has thrown away.
Chitosan is a natural and incredibly strong fixing agent that reduces the amount of chemicals used to make your blue jeans blue.
This is the chitosano. It's a completely 100% atoxic and biocompatible product. We use mixing with simply water. So we put in the water here like this, and we get at the end this kind of pasta. It's a kind of cream. There is no danger in touching. This cream goes to the machine and we apply directly on the yarn. So here is where we apply the chitosano. We don't need any more any fixing agent because the chitosano with the light fix like a shell around the yarn and protect the yarn and the color too.
You don't need to put other chemicals like a PVA, this microplastic that goes into the water, that goes into the river, and goes into the sea, and goes into the fish, for sure. It's impossible to stop. We want to reach the 360 degrees using of chitosano, and we could eliminate a huge quantity of chemicals. This is one step that is a revolutionary step into the textile denim industry, and I think is one of the ways to approach the future of this job.
This is breakthrough science in the textile industry, and if adopted by large brands, the positive impact on the environment can't be overstated.
The first point is to make something that helps you to save money. If you save chemicals, first of all, you save money. Then you save nature, but first of all, you save money.
Through cutting back on water usage and introducing their water recycling process, Ital Denim has reduced their industrial waste footprint. The plant also recaptures steam and produces its own power. There has been an enormous investment in building this infrastructure to produce an environmentally friendly fabric. The cost to the brands for this fabric is only pennies more than fabric produced in a third world country.
These are all small things that a small company like us has made. If a big company makes it, it's 10, 12, 100 times more the effect. We need to push. Everybody needs to push these guys. We need to tell to the brands that there is the possibility to make it different.
In this city, in the southeast corner of Spain, in an industrial park, sits a small company that is on the cutting edge of eco-friendly blue jean processing. Using two common elements, light and air, they've come up with ingenious methods that have the ability to replace traditional polluting methods of distressing jeans.
We completely changed the way a jean is produced. If you look into jeans finishing, you have two areas. One area we call wet processing, that includes a tremendous amount of water, and the other area we call dry processing. Dry processing includes a tremendous amount of work, of labor. So there are three technologies. One is sandblasting, that today is forbidden around the world. The second one is potassium permanganate spraying, which is about spraying a chemical product that is very dangerous if you breathe. So it's just spraying a product just to create a local abrasion. And the third one is what we call manual scrapping, which is just scrapping manually the jeans, physically, one by one, just to create some areas that look warm.
We consume about 100 liters of water for just finishing a pair of jeans, which means a lot of water, just for the finishing. Why don't we just, in terms of finishing, get that or lower that impact? So you as a consumer, you have the right to ask the brand that you're wearing where that jean came from and how it's been manufactured or finished.
Jeanology is using lasers as one tool to distress the jeans. By using light, they are able to eliminate the indigo blue color in raw denim. It sounds easy, and it is, but you still have to be creative in order to replicate the worn look that consumers are seeking.
Basically, what laser is doing is using the light to eliminate or physically sublimate the indigo from jeans and to transfer any image that we create in a computer to a jean. So we can make digital pictures of authentic, all true worn jeans, and we can take the details from there. We can play with these images and pictures in a computer, and then we can transfer this and engrave this through the energy of the light in a jean in seconds.
Jeanology is also taking water out of the equation by loading jeans into what looks like a commercial washing machine. To give jeans the washed-out, worn look, they're using an element that we take for granted every moment in our lives: air.
The G2 gets the air from the room and then it gets the oxygen out of the air, and it converts oxygen, O2, into ozone, O3. So it has no need for water at all, and it does the job that a normal stone wash process would do for hours and hours of energy and loads of water and many other products also that are harmful for nature. So it's a complete ecological, efficient, and waterless technology.
But the good thing, and that's the beauty of this technology, is that we eliminate water without increasing the cost. So that's fantastic, because then, the choice is clear. If you have two genes, one is damaging the planet, the other one not, both looks equal, and the price is the same, no one will choose the wrong one. There is no excuse.
To help sell the laser and ozone technologies to brands who age denim with chemicals, the company has enlisted the help of one of the godfathers of denim design, a man with a newfound mission, who now wants to help clean up the mess he helped to create.
Because when you do a garment in the ozone, of course, you can't just do one garment, you have to do 11 pounds, wet or dry.
Yeah, absolutely. But what is interesting is completely we are not using chemical.
Oh, no.
Just inside.
There's all there is electricity, an airline, and that's it.
That's it, air.
Francois started working with this denim facility, a place where new technologies are bumping into the old ways of distressing jeans.
You know about this machine, that is a stone wash machine. And all that. When I did that, I never imagined it was like this. But that, my friend, is the old technology that. It's a really old.
And that's good technology. Apparently, it still works today. So.
It's the past, man, it's the past. What is important here, for me, it's very important. If I invent the stone wash, and now we are inventing the water wash. We are washing with the water, with the energy. I think it's in one life, do something like inventing something and doing the antithesis of that is wonderful. I see that. It's great. It's great.
It's crazy how, from then to now, how much you changing things.
Look, the people with the mask, etc., etc. We have to save that.
Yeah.
Because living with a mask, I don't think it's really the future.
I agree.
You know all these kind of chemicals. How you live with that? You see, you need a mask. That's sponging, strapping, sponging, all this kind of stuff. Oh, it's a past. It's a past.
Francois was an innovator with passion and sensitivity, and I think that's what's needed. It's the passion and sensitivity that drive design, and design, in a way, shows you care. I did create the first stretch jean, in my humble opinion, in my not such humble opinion. The first ones were just garment washed. There was no bleaching or anything like that. It wasn't necessary.
It took 40 years before we start to understand that what we did was wrong.
I mean, we're all a bit guilty of all that, Francois or Adriano or any of us. But I think it's the degree to which it's gone. I'm sure there's many other examples in life where somebody starts something quite naively.
A young denim designer, Eric Dickstein, has had to learn the business by trial and error, while keeping to his core belief in making an ethical jean product.
Denim is one of the biggest commodities in the world. If you travel to China, where most of the world manufactures for the mass consumers, well, you end up with having rivers that are turning blue. They're like illuminating because of the chemicals that are in the water. It's hard to find out the truth sometimes. What I learned is that people close their eyes. That's really what I learned. I learned that no one really wants to talk about the little monster in the closet. So you don't learn the details because people don't want to talk about them, because at the end of the day, it's not a selling point. Oftentimes you learn by someone doing it the right way, not the wrong way, because the guy who's doing it the right way will tell you all the things that are going wrong in the industry it's definitely people that are trying to make change that will often tell you what is actually going on.
We can control the amount of ozone that's generated, how long we can expose the gene to the ozone, and really control the fading, and still get that beautiful kind of contrast and highs and lows without using any toxic chemicals and without using any pumice stone. And that's really, I think, one of the more detrimental parts to denim laundering.
Lucas Eichmann and Eric Dickstein are a new breed of jean designers and boutique manufacturers who are committed to transparency and producing ethical jeans. Their output is a microdot in the global production that companies like Levi's, Gap, Old Navy, and other large brands have in the world marketplace. What's important is that they're on the cusp of a growing movement of many small ethical labels around the world who are concerned with the massive pollution being created in the current jeans landscape.
So the option was, go with that kind of old school mentality and the existing infrastructure that's out there where they're using toxic chemicals and potassium permanganate and pumice stone, which has a huge carbon footprint to mine and haul and then creates a huge amount of waste afterward. Or kind of come up with something new, invest money in the way that we make the jean and completely control every element of how the jean is processed in the wash and make a really beautiful product and prove to the whole industry it can happen.
When you're doing something new, there's fewer clients to deal with. So basically you're building a brand. Wiser Wash Eco Park, that's a brand. And their brand is, healthy lifestyle, environment, positive, which are awesome things, but there's not enough people are jumping on that bandwagon at this point. But as soon as the big boys, the people that probably control most of the market, say, yeah, we got to jump on that movement, there will be no difference in price.
I don't think it necessarily has to cost more. And actually, we see a return on investment in a larger setting, in a pretty short period of time, because you are subtracting the cost of those chemicals. You're using less water. And so at the end of the day, there is going to be savings for the manufacturer. The challenge that we see and hear directly from other manufacturers is really just kind of overhauling their whole infrastructure. Because so far they've just kind of been putting Band-Aids on or adding things because it exists already. So it is expensive for an existing player to refurb their whole factory. And that's why I think a lot of the change is coming from brand-owned factories or people who have a concern on the front end of the business.
In our conversations with people like Majan or Soledad Castro, Francois Gerbeau, they all voice the same refrain, that big brands and big retailers in the West have been able to outsource their production, and therefore, they think they've outsourced their responsibility. In the past 55 years, the U.S. has outsourced their clothing production to developing countries, translating to low prices and increased consumption.
It is a massive issue. The statistics are insane. Something like 80 billion garments of clothes are being delivered out of factories, and those are the ones that make it out. So we don't think about all of the ones for those 80 billion amount of garments that come out of factories. Probably an equal amount has been made in factories, but it's wrong, and that's discarded. So, it's landfill, they're discarded into water. I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
In her book, Overdressed, writer Elizabeth Klein wrote, "As any economist will tell you, cheaper prices stimulate consumption. And the current low rate of fashion has spurred a shopping free-for-all, where in the United States, consumers are buying and hoarding roughly 20 billion garments per year."
The consumer did not wake up one morning saying, actually, I am fed up of spending. I want to buy 5 pairs of jeans for a fraction of the price. We were literally introduced to this concept by the fashion industry as a new business model, which is entirely to do with increasing profits.
We're depleting our natural resources. We've permanently altered our climate. In China, where most of our clothes are produced, and where a burgeoning population is gaining a taste for fashion, we're creating another environmental crisis for the planet. But we can't blame one country. We have to look globally and realize that by buying so much clothing and treating it as disposable, we are putting a huge weight on the environment, and it is simply unsustainable. When the name of the game is fast and cheap, is it any wonder that the costs of protecting the environment are often nowhere to be found in the operating budgets of companies who supply our insatiable appetite for fast fashion? Critics of this trend agree that something must be done.
The change will happen. How quickly is determined by the consumer.
You can make a difference by voting with your dollar. Just choosing to buy a responsible product versus a conventional product, you are going to make change.
But I think it's our job as a brand and the community of designers and brands that exist to help educate consumers.
I don't think any consumers, if they know about what is going on, in our rivers and all this impact on the local communities, sometimes they very serious health impact. I don't think they're gonna, continue to be silent. I think they will, I hope that they can use their buying power to try to influence the factories and also especially the brands, and through them to try to, pressure them to green their supply chain. I think that's doable.
The only thing we would say, just to get the historical record right, we have never really gone after a company before asking them politely, through reports, through meetings, to change. In those meetings, generally, the CEOs will say, of course we agree with what Greenpeace is saying, we're working on it, here's a thick plan of our environmental sustainability approach, and so on and so forth. But then what we find is, once they get back into their day-to-day job, they slip back into a business-as-usual approach. There's no urgency. If anything, the best they're doing are baby steps in the right direction. And we want them not to just do symbolic greenwashing things. We want them actually to make the changes that ultimately is going to be good for the environment and good for the long-term sustainability of their businesses.
In 2025, the need of the water for humans will be double. But every day we are killing the water for stupid stuff like a pair of blue jeans.
The future of the fashion and textile industry over the next immediate few years will be looking at transparency, traceability, toxicity, and textile waste. So it all starts with a T, easy to remember. Let's do something about it pretty quickly.
I think all corporations have to be accountable for their environmental practices, and no one has a right to damage or destroy a river. So I do think more within the textile sector have to truly commit to a fashion industry without pollution. I also think in the end, the consumer has a lot of power. And if more and more of us sought out clothing that was made in an environmentally friendly manner, that would go a long way to improve things as well.
All yours.
I wonder if we can put it where we can see everybody, like the Hollywood. Yeah, on the view. I'm gonna go on the view, right? There we go. Give everybody a second to. We can unmute ourselves if you want to give your reaction to the video. I think it covered a lot of the themes that were there, everything from the Buy Nothing campaign to sustainable shopping and things like that. Does anyone have any initial reactions they would like to say?
It's horrifying.
I'm sorry?
It's horrifying.
That it's depressing.
And it's depressing. And is it too late? You know, it's just it's horrible. So I'm hoping, you know, in the movie they did a good job of starting with the horrors and at the end at least giving us a tad bit of hope. I hope you guys are going to tell us. I wonder if there's any follow-up, because it said at the very end there, obviously it's a little bit of an older film, it's not brand new. It said that these brands had promised by 2020 to change their practices. I wonder if they have.
I wondered the same thing.
Yeah. And do you have any tips for us? Like how do we shop more mindfully, other than buying less in general, thrifting and those kinds of things? Do you have an idea, you know, what brands are more environmentally friendly, things like that? Well,
funny you should say that. You can't really see it for those away. There you go. I just looked online for sustainable jeans, and you find actually I should have looked up these companies just to, you know, kind of support them for being pioneers in the act. Now the pair that I have, I think it's called Everlane, and I'll just read you what they give you. We set out to make the world's cleanest denim. It's made at a LEED certified factory in Vietnam with some of the most stringent sustainability practices in the industry, like recycling 98% of its water and air drying all jeans. What's more, the facility repurposes denim byproducts to make bricks for affordable housing. So there are, and it's sort of, the way I would see it, it's sort of like the interest in organic food. The more there's consumer demand for it, the more people will, the more entrepreneurs will say, that's where I'm going to shift my resources. So we basically just have to find it out. The other good point, I don't want to monopolize it, but the other good point is how hard it is for the established jean makers like Levi's and Wrangler, because they have huge production processes that are already in place, and they would have to kind of change a lot of that in order to, they almost have to like build new facilities all together. And all the progressive ones are all startups that can develop the technology from the beginning.
I'll add, I think there were a couple of things that the movie really illustrated well. There were a couple of points that the movie didn't talk about, but the book did, and I just wanted to kind of hit on those. The book hit more on the issue of fast fashion, which, and some statistics that she had in the book were that 1 in 3 young women in the UK consider clothes old after wearing them only once or twice. And that 1 in 7 consider it a fashion faux pas to be photographed in an outfit more than once. So I don't think that this crowd is one of the crowds that is an issue with. I know for me it's not, and I'd never even thought or heard of that before I read the book, really. But the whole issue of fast fashion, where some of these younger, the generation that's been growing up, and they're really influenced by these influencers on Instagram and Snapchat, And their whole business model is to be seen in a different outfit every day, never be seen in the same clothes twice, and basically to sell a lot of clothing. And that's what their business model is for these influencers. And that's what the younger generations are growing up watching and thinking is normal. So that's part of the problem, the psychology of really literally fast fashion being that that item of clothing has absolutely no value. You wear it once and you throw it away. And then another thing that the movie didn't really talk about, but the book captured, was at the end of the life cycle of an item of clothing, which is after some people wear it once or twice, I guess. We might feel better because we're donating it to a Salvation Army or some other organization, but the reality is we're really not doing a great job of recycling those clothes, and a very small percentage of those clothes get actually purchased at a Salvation Army, and then they often end up somewhere in Africa at a huge, depressing marketplace where there's millions of tons of these old clothes from, you know, Europe and America that are ending up in landfills that catch on fire. And a lot of the people, again, that are affected, the workforce that's affected, are often young women who they talk about women who carry hundreds of pounds of clothes in bundles on their heads around these marketplaces and are paid almost nothing. So those were kind of two aspects of this industry that I think the movie didn't cover. A couple of statistics that I thought were interesting. China produced enough fabric in a year, the year from mid 2019 to 2020, to wrap around the world 1,219 times in 1 year. That's just in China and just the fabric making process. And so it doesn't even talk about creating the fabric or what's, you know, processing it, cutting and sewing it afterwards. And then also they're estimating that the entire industry contributes the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions globally as the countries of France, Germany, and the UK combined.
Yeah, I read it. I saw that.
So those were a couple of really depressing statistics from that. But to answer your question also, Melody, I think she did do a relatively good job of also trying to, you know, come up with some positive things that we can do. And she talks about really being more conscientious and conscious consumers and reestablishing our roles as a citizen. And the fact that we really need to enact legislation around the world that tackles these issues and then actually make sure it's enforced, because legislation that's enacted but not enforced doesn't do anything. One of the things she mentioned was that if we as Americans told our legislators that we wanted a law that any clothes that are going to be sold into the United States needed to be held to certain environmental qualitative standards, and needed an accounting of the greenhouse gas emissions that were generated in the production of those products, then that would be a requirement for all clothing that was going to be imported into this country. We, like the movie said, we basically exported our pollution and our greenhouse gases by exporting the labor and the production. But there are legislative things that can be done. And one example is this law in New York State that's been proposed. It's gotten out of committee. It's called the New York Fashion Law or something like that. And it is actually a law that Stella McCartney helped get written. So there are a few designers that are knowledgeable, you know, that are working on this issue. And basically the idea is that so much clothing gets sold in New York State. It's basically that idea. It's like the car emissions law for California required, you know, higher mileage requirements. And since so many cars are sold in California, the manufacturers basically had to manufacture all their cars to those standards. Well, the same idea with this law is in New York State. So much clothing gets sold in New York that they would require that all the clothing that would be sold in New York State would have to basically disclose more information about its supply chain and the greenhouse gas emissions through the supply chain of that clothing. And because manufacturers want to sell in New York as well as the rest of the country, they were kind of hoping that I think that would follow through and affect all of the clothes. It hasn't passed in New York yet, but it has been discussed in this session. Just in, I think, January, it got out of committee and I think was voted on by the House, but not the Senate or the other way around. So there are people working on these issues, and I do feel like it's going to take some legislation and enforcement of legislation in order to make a real difference, because these little companies are great, but the big issues are with these huge global conglomerate companies. We don't even know who they are in a lot of cases because they're supplying, one huge conglomerate manufacturer could supply many brands, and we don't even know who they are. So those were a couple of things that we might want to work on, but basically she suggested making sure that an item of clothing that you're buying gives you joy, fits you well, you're going to want to wear it a lot and wear it often and keep it for a long time. And so those are things that and makes you feel good. And those are things that she suggested at the end of her book, which I highly recommend, by the way.
Norma?
Yeah, my hubby's making dinner and I may have to go any minute, but I guess about 25 years ago, it could be longer than that. Anyway, I've always been interested in vintage clothing, and so I started my own line of clothing, which has been very popular whenever I sell it. I used to sell it at different fairs and things like that, and also in New York at some well-known, like there was like a vintage places where you could buy various vintage clothing and other items that doesn't exist really anymore, but you would go out on a pier and into a building and you'd set yourself up. So anyway, what I have done is buy these items like slips and velvet tops and all kinds of things for a very inexpensive price because they were just old lingerie, right? And I have a supplier at the lady in Lambertville who is at the flea market there for many years. I've known her. So I will dye, bead, and embroider the stuff and then sell it. And I recommend people, you may not be into doing that, but you could buy that stuff, but also just think about buying vintage because vintage clothing is really beautiful. And but of course it's different now than it was maybe 30 years ago, 20 years ago even. There's less available, but I still have this stuff around, and there's all clever ways. It's just like when I saw the movie Babe, I never ate pork again. You know what I mean? And as I get various revelations occur in my life, then I have adopted different ways of doing things that have gone on for, at this point, multiple decades. So, and I feel like the movie and the whole concept of this is a way for each one of us in our own way to develop a way of responding to this horrible situation. Like, I think I have 2 pairs of jeans, maybe 3, that I've been wearing the same pair for like years. I don't even like jeans, okay? But anyway, everybody to each his or her own things that they like.
Some of us don't keep the same waist size all those years.
That's awesome. No, you can buy stuff, some of the stuff I have, it's not just for being a 4, 6, 8, or 10. I have stuff that's for larger people. It doesn't matter. It's the conceptual framework of buying a vintage velvet top that didn't look very good or had a spot on it, and then dyeing it with a natural dye, and it's spectacular. And it has a new life that could go on for another 50 years if you take care of it. So we don't need to buy any of the stuff at any of these stores, really.
Yeah, you and I might know that, but the rest of the world may not.
Well, how do we change? One person, one
Yeah.
family, one group of people at a time. We can't change it all, but clearly this was a
Meryl
horror.
asked a great question about education, and I was at a great event actually earlier this week before I realized I had COVID.
Poor baby.
We were at Penn Monday night at a event that was put on by a couple of graduate students at Penn in the fashion program, and they're studying sustainable fashion. It was a really cool program of some great local entrepreneurs doing sustainable fashion in the Philadelphia area. So really inspiring. And one thing that was mentioned was doing some education for younger people, like putting together some kind of educational programs to talk about this issue. Because truthfully, how many of us even think about that when we go buying clothes? We know about it, like Barry said, when we talk about food, but we don't even think about it with clothing. And I think that's part of the issue, Meryl.
Yeah. Just there is increasing awareness. I know at Ryder we have what's called the Eco Reps. Actually, I saw this film from something that the student organization put this together, and that was my the first time I viewed it. And actually, the younger generation is more environmentally conscious than our generation, because they're going to inherit more of the meth than we are. It's just a slow-moving train that will gain hopefully momentum as we go along. Meryl, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I did actually. The old expression, "the children of the future." Well, they are, and I think that it's really important that this kind of thing reach the high school level. And one of the things that I think all the schools do, at least my kids' schools did, in order to get out of high school, they had to do internships. Of some sort of importance. And I just wonder if this kind of education could happen in the schools, and if the kids would have opportunities, the kids who are interested in this kind of issue, which are many young people today, could they be given opportunities to do internships in this field to promote, more sustainable production and buying, consumerism, the whole business. It starts with them. It's great that we're doing what we're doing and talking to legislators and doing things that we're doing, but it starts and ends with them.
Yeah,
they're the up and coming folks.
Yeah, that's true. And raising awareness, both in terms of consumer choices and helping influence the larger scheme of things, is important. When we talked about policy, I know Dara mentioned it, and the video just mentioned very little about policies and the roles of government in all this, and seems to emphasize that consumers are the vehicle of choice. But remember when Bill Clinton signed the NAFTA that was noted in the film, it creates the three countries, and now we have other treaties with other regions of the world, and it allows for the free flow of capital, but it lowers the environmental regulations to the lowest common denominator. So labor rights and environmental laws that we might have in the United States are not applicable in any of these treaties. And one way to basically try to influence it is when these trade treaties are made, it's really, they're just pro-business treaties that allow for the free flow of movement of goods, but they don't agree to the environmental regulations or labor rights, for that matter, at the same time. And that's the way to try to bring
And
about change.
that was a part of the design. That wasn't an oversight. That
Right.
was actually in part of the design of those
Yeah.
those trade and labor agreements, which I think we're going to rue the day that we decided.
Right.
To do
And, you know I feel that I'm like an intelligent person. I had no idea that was the outcome of that. I always thought NAFTA was really a good thing, and it's not true. There's a major flaw in it.
NAFTA, we don't have to.
Very good. I think Mark had
But it's like
Oh, yeah,
anything else,
I'm looking at the screen and there are people here, sorry.
I was curious.
Can you have her either come up to the Bima or
Sure, I can repeat the question. She asked,
Okay.
when was this video produced? And I'm going to guess, based on the back of this, 2016.
This film seems to be more ahead or had more information more recent than the book I was reading. This was just a chapter and of the book that jumped out at me as I walked through Barnes and Noble. I mean, it had a white cover and all the other books on the table with dark covers. So this was just one chapter of many other things, but it was good. I liked the way you visually got in the beginning how the water was so polluted and got the horror of it first, and then the buildup as to how it happened and what's being done now. So.
Right, and they look at leather as well as, the textiles, the making of the cloth.
Marcia just said that she liked the way that it gave you all the horrors, but then build up to the solutions.
Oh, okay, I'll repeat that. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? We didn't really, I'm focusing on the screen. Does anybody else like to make a comment?
$50 shoes, is that what they were implying?
Okay. The question was, is the movie implying it's better to buy a $300 pair of shoes and presumably more sustainably made, perhaps, than 5 or 6 shoes at $50 each to kind of counter the fast fashion, because you'll probably something $300 you'll endure more. Anybody want to comment on that? There was research, first of all, that was done that looked at products made even with union labor or made in the United States with the same product of similar quality made overseas. And, they were looking at prices, and the differentials aren't really that great, that even though you have cheaper labor and more environmental leeway, it just goes to profits for the corporations. And then, you have a CEO who is getting raises based on the degree of profits you bring to the company and for the shareholders. And so in a lot of ways, that $300 pair is probably better quality, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it was because of sustainable methods that were used. You have fancy clothes that are also made under these conditions. I'm thinking of those leather products too that you saw.
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to bring up that point. It wasn't clear in the movie, but it's not just leather products and jeans products that are an issue here. The book really highlights that it's all fabric, whether it's natural cotton-based fabric or any, oh my God, look how cute.
That's little Avi. Hey, Avi.
That's adorable. Any fabric, and really a big problem, and one of the things that was brought up at the thing at Penn on Monday night was that if the cotton fabric has even a sliver, a 10%, 2% of spandex or some other product, polyester, anything in it, they can't recycle it. So, you know, like a material has to be pure cotton or pure wool or pure linen in order to be recyclable. These composite materials that we all wear all the time are literally, they don't know what to do with, they can't recycle them. And spandex is a huge issue. They literally don't know what to do with it to recycle it. So that was an interesting conversation, but it's not just leather and denim that are the issues. It's really every fabric and the amounts of it that are being created and dyed and cut and sewn and travel around the world multiple times as they're getting made and everything.
I think the Avi was there to ask about, I think the question was about sustainably made onesies, I think was the question that was being proposed.
He was saying, what are you doing to my world?
Oh, yes.
And start having thoughts about, is this the best product for the environment? Is it something that's sustainable? And just like kind of start questioning, like, I'm buying new windows. Which company provides me windows that will at least have recycled materials or something like that, so that you're just like putting thought into the product that you're getting?
I'll repeat, the comment was that when buying a product, we should have more knowledge about the impact that was made, we'll say in terms of the environment at the point of purchasing, and even with other, besides clothing, even windows and things like that. You know, to use that food, how we became more advanced in food, there are some, I know at Whole Foods, they have different levels of beef, and the top level is you can actually point to the ranch that the place was at. So in other words, you could have more consumer education on products you're getting, and that's just because of a niche market, perhaps, but one could require that to some, and I think that came up in the video as well. So if we're buying jeans, you know, obviously the sustainable made ones like the one I made, they want to give you that information because they you know, it's but they don't. Does Levi's do that? Does the Gap do that? Does Lucky do that? And they don't. Oh, it's after 6, which means there's another group coming to use the building. I think I see all this rock and roll equipment coming in. Does anybody have any thoughts? Last parting comments?
Could I just make one comment in that I spent time on a World Health Organization fellowship in India for several months in 1982. And some of the problems existed along the Ganges because the Ganges is over and over again throughout the trip. And the change that was described here in, I guess, 92, 2002, 12, it's 40 years, I guess, okay? It's definitely 40 years since I've been there. But still, in real time, 40 years, to see that level of degeneration of the Ganges was just overwhelming for me to take in, because I knew there were problems then. It was very much pointed out because I was on a public health trip, okay? Doing dentistry, but public health and the assessment. And so there was, what this movie showed was a tremendous degeneration in the quality of the basics.
If I could just sum up, because it looks like one, I would add that Dara put in the chat about other ways you can learn. I mentioned Allbirds. I brought my Allbirds shoes with me to go with my sustainable shoe. I wouldn't say I do it all the time, but I do that. But one way is for us as consumers to become more educated, as well as practice that. there are publications along the way that kind of highlight it a little bit to help. And second, that there's a political and economic side as well, and that's how do we legislate, how do we protect the environment from abuses. You know, even those who are pro-market would have, if you even read Milton Friedman, which is more the conservative economist, even talks about externalities when somebody doing something has an adverse effect on others. So it would, when water supplies become ruined because of something like that, that would certainly fit into that category as well. So we have to remember that and work on that as well. Again, if this is it, I want to thank Tikkun Olam and Dara and Susan for organizing the whole project and stuff like that, and thank everybody for coming. And I don't know, is there like a questionnaire or anything that anyone's going to get?
Yeah, I will be sending out the recording of this event, and I'll also include a link to our resource page. We have a Buy Nothing resource page, which talks more about the Buy Nothing campaign and that which this is a part of. And also we have a fast fashion resource page, which has links to podcasts, articles, and other resources about the fast fashion industry. So I'll send that out to all of the attendees.
There are a bunch of chats on here, and I can't get, I don't know what you do to get it to roll. Oh, here, it's daunting. Okay, given that, yeah, it's daunting. Well, you know, a lot of the biggest problems, we have to get together, unite, and hopefully do it.
So there you go. Read the chats before we zip off. So thanks again, Barry. It was
Thank you so much, Barry. This was great.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing us this movie.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
all.
you for coming, everybody.
Thank you so much.
That was really
great.
enlightening. Thank you so much.
Really enlightening.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
At the book, everybody, you'll become a convert. Maxine Bedard, the author, started, she's had
It worked pretty decently, I think.
Yeah.
So,
It's always.
anyway, did the pizza ever come? Do we know?
I assume it did. I assume it did because they didn't complain.
Oh, I think they're still there. Is everybody still there?
We are. Did the pizza ever get to you?
So.
I forgot, and thank you to Howard for organizing all this.
See you all, guys. Stay safe.
Bye.
Oh, so long.